All right, so buckle up, everybody. We're going deep today on something that's pretty unsettling. China's military ambitions and this report that's got everyone in Washington buzzing. It's called China's Civil Military Fusion, a looming threat to U.S. deterrence. And let me tell you, it paints a picture of an arms race unlike anything we've ever seen. We're going to break down why this matters so much right now and what it could mean for all of us.
You know what's really interesting about this report? It throws out the old Cold War playbook. This isn't about just newts or stealth fighters anymore. We're talking about a whole new way a country gets ready for war.
Okay, so paint a picture for us. The report kicks off with this war game scenario. And spoiler alert, it doesn't end well for the U.S.
Yeah, so they're simulating a conflict over Taiwan. And what they found was pretty shocking. The U.S. runs out of key missiles in just 8 days.
8 days?
8 days. That's like less than a vacation for some people.
Wow, seriously. 8 days. Even I know that's not a good sign. The report makes this point that China, they play the long game right. They think in centuries, not election cycles. 8 days to them, that's nothing.
Exactly. It's a totally different mindset. The U.S. military, we've been all about short, decisive engagements, using, high-tech weapons. But China, it's like they're preparing for something completely different, like a war of attrition where they just grind their opponent down.
So it's like they're training for a marathon and we're training for a sprint.
That's a really good analogy. And their secret weapon in this marathon, it's something called civil military fusion.
Ah, yes, civil military fusion. That term kept popping up in the report. Honestly, sounds kind of Orwellian. Can you break it down for us? What is this fusion thing all about?
Okay, imagine this. Every factory, every shipyard, every research lab in China, they're legally obligated to help the military. That's basically what civil military fusion is. It means the entire country's industrial power can be used for a war.
Hold on, so you're telling me, like when I order those sneakers online from China, the factory making them could also be pumping out tank parts. That's kind of freaky.
Oh, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. They've designed commercial fares that can carry tanks. They're building shipyards like it's going out of style. This isn't just about having a big army. It's about turning their entire economy into a war machine.
So basically, every time we hear about China's economy booming, we should also be thinking about what that means for their military.
I think that's a really smart way to look at it. They're playing a different game, one where their huge population and manufacturing power, those become their biggest weapons.
Okay, so how does that stack up against the U.S.? I mean, we spend a ton of our military, too.
Yeah, but this is where the numbers get really interesting. China's shipbuilding capacity is something like 350 times that of the United States.
Wait a minute. 350 times. I gotta be honest, that number just melted my brain a little.
It's a hard number to wrap your head around. For every aircraft carrier the U.S. launches, China could have an entire fleet ready to go. That's the kind of difference we're talking about. And it has huge implications for U.S. power in the Pacific.
Okay, so they're building ships like crazy. What about other weapons? Like, I'm guessing they're not making 350 times more nukes than us, right?
Well, no, not quite. But when it comes to things like cruise missiles, the difference is still pretty alarming. They can churn out more missiles in a week than the U.S. does in a year.
So even if our missiles are fancier, they can just overwhelm us with sheer numbers. I'm starting to see why this report is causing such a stir.
You know what they say? Quantity has a quality all its own. And that seems to be at the heart of China's strategy.
All right, so we've established that China is seriously beefing up their military. But the big question is, what are they planning to do with all that firepower? Is this just about Taiwan, or are we talking about something bigger?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. While Taiwan is definitely a flashpoint, China's ambitions seem to go way beyond that. Their strategic goals are much broader, with potential targets including the Philippines, South Korea, even Japan.
So this isn't just about one island. This is about regional dominance. And if they get their way, what happens to the rest of us?
That's the question that keeps a lot of people up at night, and it's one we need to start thinking about seriously. I mean, the report lays out this scenario where, like, if Taiwan falls, that could be, like a domino effect. Other countries in the region, they see America can't really counter China's power, so they might have to side with Beijing.
Yeah, out of fear, or just, trying to stay on the winning side, I guess. It's funny, this whole thing kind of reminds me of that domino theory back in the Cold War, except now it's not about communism. It's about China running the show.
And you know what else is unsettling? This war in Ukraine, it's really shown us some cracks in America's own, military-industrial complex.
Yeah, suddenly we're the ones scrambling for ammo.
It's been a real wake-up call. The conflict in Ukraine has shown just how much our system is struggling to keep up. We're seeing our stockpiles of key weapons, like artillery shells and javelin missiles. They're dwindling fast. Turns out, even with all our fancy tech, we're having trouble meeting the demands of a long fight.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it? We're supposed to be the big dog, but now we're the ones running low on supplies.
Yeah, a lot of people are pointing out that irony. The U.S., once the arsenal of democracy during World War II, now we're facing a potential shortage of basic weapons.
What happened? Why can't we just ramp up production like we used to?
It seems like our system has gotten bogged down. Too much bureaucracy and this focus on super complex and expensive weapons systems. We've lost some of that agility and adaptability. It's become really tough to shift gears quickly when things change.
So we're so busy building the ultimate weapon that we've forgotten about just having enough weapons.
I think there's a growing feeling that we need to rethink our priorities, maybe even go back to basics a little bit.
Back to basics. So are we talking about like churning out tanks and rifles by the millions?
Not necessarily about abandoning technology altogether, it's more about finding that balance. The report suggests a few things we could do to improve. One is to get back to focusing on mass production. We need to be able to make large quantities of weapons quickly and efficiently.
So streamline the process, get those production lines humming. What else?
Another key point is to focus on weapons that are designed for mass production. This might mean moving away from those super complex, expensive systems, the ones that take years to develop and build.
So instead of betting everything on a few super weapons, we need a more adaptable arsenal, something that can scale up when we need it to.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that in a future conflict, we might not be able to rely on just a handful of high-tech platforms.
This is almost a philosophical shift, isn't it? Instead of trying to police the world with limited resources, maybe we need to focus on becoming the world's top arms supplier. We could help our allies defend themselves instead of trying to do it all ourselves.
That's an interesting idea. It reflects this growing realization that the old model of U.S. military dominance, it might not work anymore, not in a world where rivals like China are catching up so fast.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about China and the U.S., but what does all this mean for, like, the average person? Why should we care about all this military stuff?
This goes way beyond just, abstract geopolitical debates. We're talking about the balance of power in the world and what that means for global stability and security. If China's military influence keeps growing unchecked, it could have huge implications for everything, from trade and the economy to human rights and democracy.
So this isn't some far-off problem that we can just ignore?
Absolutely not. This is happening right now, and the decisions we make today will have a direct impact on the world we live in tomorrow.
All right, that's a lot to take in. But it's also a call to action, right? We can't just sit here and wring our hands. If we understand the challenge, we can start looking for solutions.
I completely agree. Awareness is the first step. We need to have an open and honest conversation about these issues. We need to start thinking seriously about how to adapt to this changing world.
So where do we go from here? What's the next step?
Well, the report doesn't give us easy answers, but it does raise some really important questions we all need to think about.
Let's unpack some of those questions then. What are the key takeaways here? What do we really need to understand about China's civil-military fusion and what it means for the U.S.?
The most important takeaway, I think, is that China is playing the long game. They're building their military power methodically and strategically, and they're doing it in a way that uses their entire economy and industrial capacity. This is a challenge we can't afford to ignore or underestimate.
It's not just about the hardware, is it? It's about a different mindset, a different way of thinking about power and strategy.
Exactly. We need to move beyond those old Cold War ways of thinking. This is a new kind of arms race, one where industrial capacity and the ability to fight a long war, those might be just as important as having the best technology.
So what does all this mean for the United States? Are we destined to fall behind?
Not necessarily. We still have a lot of strengths. We have a strong technological base and a network of allies. But we need to be willing to adapt, to change our thinking, and to make some tough choices.
What kind of choices? Can we really maintain a credible deterrent against a rival like China? Or is it too late for that?
That's the tough question, isn't it? And I honestly don't know if there's an easy answer, but here's something to consider. Is simply having more powerful weapons enough?
It's like we've stepped into some alternate reality, right? Like a few years ago, everyone was talking about the end of history, and now it's all back to great power competition.
Yeah, it's a reminder that history doesn't really end. It just kind of goes in circles. And I think right now we're in this cycle where industrial strength and long-term planning, those are back in style.
So we've talked about the challenge, right? China's civil-military fusion. It's massive, and there are some gaps in U.S. production. But is there any way to, turn this thing around? Any reason for optimism?
Well, I wouldn't say we're completely out of options. The report does offer a few paths we could take.
Okay, give us some hope. What could the U.S. do to actually catch up?
I think one of the biggest things is fixing our defense acquisition process. It's famous for being slow and bureaucratic. It can take forever to get new weapons from the design phase to the battlefield.
So cut the red tape, streamline things, make it easier to build stuff and get it into the hands of the people who need it.
Exactly. We need to be way more agile and responsive. We need to be able to adapt to new threats and new technologies as they pop up. The report also talks about this need for a closer relationship between the government and private industry when it comes to defense.
So break down the walls between the military and civilian industries. Get more collaboration going, more sharing of expertise and tech.
Yeah, that's the idea. We need to tap into that innovation and energy from the private sector if we're going to compete with China's system. And maybe even more importantly, we need to change our mindset. We can't just assume we can win by throwing money at a few super expensive weapons.
So we need a more down-to-earth approach. Focus on weapons that work, that are affordable, and that we can make a lot of quickly.
Exactly, you got it. It's about recognizing that in a future conflict, quantity might be just as important as quality. It's about investing in the long-term health of our industrial base, making sure we can actually build the weapons we need when we need them.
I got to be honest, this all sounds pretty overwhelming, but it's also a good reminder that we're not just sitting ducks in all of this. You know, we have choices to make.
And those choices matter. They'll shape not just the future of the U.S., but the future of the whole world.
I think this deep dive has given us all a lot to think about. We've got a new perspective on China's rise and the challenges we're up against and the tough questions we need to be asking.
Yeah, and it's important to remember this is an ongoing conversation. Things are changing constantly, so we need to stay informed and engaged.
You're right. And on that note, I want to encourage all our listeners to go deeper on this stuff. Do your own research. Think critically about what it all means for your own future. Because in a world where power is shifting so fast, nothing's is power. Understanding these challenges, that's the first step towards solutions.
Well said. And even when things feel uncertain, there's always hope. Hope that through good conversations, strategic planning, and, a renewed commitment to our nation's strength, we can figure this all out and create a brighter future for everyone.
This has been a deep dive, folks. Thanks for joining us.